got the Jeopardy music that we could play?
Right, we're good to go.
Okay, very good. Webinar is now streaming live on Facebook. So welcome all of our Facebook fans to the meeting of the Thurston Regional Planning Council of November 5th, 2021. We'll go through our usual, hold on a second, I gotta find it. There we go. Our usual introduction. So who do we have from Lacey today?
Malcolm Miller, Lacey City Council, position number 1.
And Olympia?
Clark Gilman, representing Olympia.
Rainier?
Dennis McVeigh.
Tumwater?
Debbie Sullivan.
And I'm JW Foster, representing Yelm. Intercity Transit?
Carolyn Cox.
And Lacey Fire District number 3. There he is. Nope. Where'd Rick go? He was here a minute ago. Lot?
Cynthia Pratt.
North Thurston Public Schools?
Gretchen Maliska.
Olympia School District?
Hillary Seidel.
Port of Olympia?
Zeta, Port of Olympia.
PUD number 1. I'm sure they'll come in later. Evergreen?
Scott Morgan.
And where are you coming from this morning, Scott? That's quite a nice sky you got there.
Eastern Washington.
Ah, welcome. Thurston EDC.
Morning, Michael Cade.
Morning, Michael. Timberland Regional Library.
Good morning, Cheryl Haywood.
Our favorite library system in the whole region. Tumwater School District.
Mel Murray.
And Thurston Conservation District. How about Thurston County? I thought I saw Commissioner Edwards.
You did. Good morning.
Good morning. Do we have anyone representing the Chehalis tribe today? How about the Nisqually tribe?
Heidi Thomas here.
Hi, Heidi.
Hi.
Town of Bucota? And City of Tenino. Okay, I think I've got all of our members. Mark, do you want to introduce staff?
Yes, I will do my best. So from TRPC, we have me, Mark Daly, the director, Berlina Lucas, Dave Reed, Karen Parkhurst, Katrina Van Every, Vina Tabbitt, Amy Hatch-Winnica, and Aiden Dixon. And from City of Olympia, we have Joyce Phillips. From Olympia Schools, we have Frank Wilson. From Tumwater, we have Mary Heather Ames. From North Thurston Public Schools, Dean Martin Olich. From City of Lacey, Martin Hoppy. From Thurston County, Jenica Machado. From Intercity Transit, Jessica Gould and Eric Phillips. And that's what I had when I started. So if I haven't introduced a staff person, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Looks like I got him. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, and it looks like we have another Port Commissioner, Bill McGregor, languishing in the attendee room. Perhaps we could invite him in as well. With introductions done, then we will move on to our first order of business, which is to approve the agenda.
Move to approve. Zeta.
Thank you.
Second.
Seconded by Carolyn. All in favor?
Aye.
Great. We have our agenda. And the next would be the consent calendar, which is the minutes and the vouchers.
I move to approve the consent agenda. Cynthia Pratt.
Second, Zeta.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Just so folks know, we've never really had to do this, but on the consent calendar, if there's something that you don't like the minutes are wrong or something like that, you can ask to pull that particular item off the consent calendar for separate discussion, and we can just deal with that separately. But otherwise, most of what goes on the consent calendar has already been looked at, and we're just, seeing it there for approval. Public comment, we didn't have anybody sign up. There's nobody in the attendees, so we can move past that. And we get right into our first order of business, which is the work program presentation from Vina.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I am going to share my screen. And for those of you that don't know me, I'm Vina Tabbitt, and I'm the Deputy Director here at TRPC. And each year about this time, I come to brief you about our next year's work program. So before I start talking about the work program, and the work program represents what we're working on for next year, I want to talk a little bit about where we get our revenue for what we work on. So this graph shows that the main part of our revenue, 39%, comes from our core transportation activities. As many of you know, we're both a metropolitan planning organization and a regional transportation planning organization. And so we receive some dedicated funding for transportation. And in addition to that, we also run the commute trip reduction program for the region. So those are continuing programs that we do over and over again for the region. 32% comes from other federal and state grants or funding. Things like that include running the lead entity program or receiving other, we receive lots of other grants like to update schools mapping or do the Martin Way corridor study, that sort of thing. Then 15% comes from contractual work for our members. That's where you reach out and ask us to work on something on your behalf. That can include the climate mitigation planning that's on behalf of the cities of Lacey, Olympia, Tumwater, as well as Thurston County. And then 14% comes from member assessments. And the member assessments are used both to match a lot of our federal transportation program as well as for our information services program. We try to make the best use of the member assessments. In 2017, they represent 20% of our work program, and they're down to 14%. That's because we're really trying to leverage them to get the most out of our state and federal dollars and bring those in. For every dollar in dues or assessments that you give us, we bring in about 5 in state and federal dollars for our work program. We have a work program subcommittee that meets and reviews the work program and gives us feedback prior to bringing it to you all. This year, JW, Clark Gilman, Carolyn Cox, Hillary Seidel, Malcolm Miller, and Chris Stern sat on our work program subcommittee, and I'm sure they'll be happy to field any questions along with Mark and myself as we move forward in this agenda item. So the purpose of the work program, it really, like I said, looks at the revenue side of our budget, and it highlights the projects and programs for the coming year. And we give you a sort of one sentence indication in the first 2 pages, and then a detailed dive into the work program as you go into the subsequent pages. And then the assessments table is on the very back of the work program, and it shows how we pull in the assessments or the dues. So a couple of things I want to highlight today, and I usually try to highlight just things that are new for you. Under information services, one of the things we've brought out for this year, and it's the first time we've done this in a long time, we're planning to do a household travel survey. That's a federally funded grant program, but we're planning to do that survey in April, May of next year. And the consultant team that we are working with and trying to get under contract has said that if we offer incentive cards, we're going to have much higher participation and they do household travel surveys across the nation, and they're saying that it's really hard to get people to participate in surveys, increasingly hard in the last few years. It's been hard in the past, but it's increasingly hard. And so offering incentives to have them participate is really a cost-efficient way rather than trying to reach out to 20 times more households for a few more to participate. But we can't use federal funding for that. So we want to use that out of our informational services funding. and since we're not, it's not a retreat year, we have a little bit of extra wiggle room because we're not hiring a retreat consultant. One part of those incentives is to offer higher incentives for people who don't traditionally participate, so we can make sure that we get a really good representative sample of people participating in the household travel survey. It's one of the only surveys we do that absolutely has to be statistically significant because we use it to update our modeling tools, and we really need to know how people travel in different demographic age groups and that sort of thing. Under program support, one thing that we've added this year is possible stipends for TPB business or community representatives. We are soliciting for community representatives now, and we'll be looking for some community reps next year. But there has been talk on the Transportation Policy Board about how it might be good to engage people that don't traditionally participate, and that the use of stipends has been a very successful way to get folks to engage on that type of committee. So we just want to make sure that we have identified in our work program the ability to do that. We haven't actually made the decision to do that yet. And then under council priorities, the only council priority we identified for the work program for next year is just follow up on the retreat work, continue to fine tune all the things that we learned from the retreat. So with that, I am happy to take any questions. I'm trying to stop sharing my screen.
I'm not seeing any hands go up. So I guess the committee did a great job. And thank you for putting that presentation together for us, Mina. There's a lot of work that goes on. I am curious though, what kind of incentive cards are we looking at doing? Like free library cards from Timberland, or?
I think they recommended there's 3 or 4 that they use, but Visa cash cards or something of that nature, ranging from $10 to $30, depending on how the participant signs up. So, or the household signs up. So there's 2 different ways that we're going to offer it. One is an app on your smartphone that tracks folks for 5 days. So it's a pretty long commitment. And another is an online survey that's a 1 day. So there's just different ways of collecting information. And of course, the more information we have, the better it is for our purposes.
And that will come out, you're expecting that survey to start when?
We are hoping it'll be April and May of this year, unless there's something that changes the travel patterns again. Of course, we were hoping, or not of course, but we were hoping to have it actually this fall, but then we delayed it because of the pandemic, and we're hoping things will settle down a little bit more.
All right, well, thank you. Okay, then we will move on to Jenica on the report on Broadband Action Team.
Good morning.
Jenica, really quick, just to introduce this topic. Hi, Mark Daly. We've talked about broadband access quite a bit here around council table, and I think that folks know, because we've also mentioned this start of a broadband action team, and this is something that a handful of organizations we've been working on since late spring, setting this up, and we really got kicked off in summer. And the county has taken a leadership role in this, and Jenica Machado is our lead for this broadband action team. And so I just wanted to make sure that all of council had an opportunity to hear what have we done so far? What are we planning to do? Because we know that broadband access is on everyone's front of mind right now. So thank you so much, Jenica, for making the time this morning.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here. Jenica Machado, Economic Development Manager with Thurston County. And so I'll just go ahead and share my screen. Okay.
We are seeing it, Jenica.
Perfect. All right. So as Mark had mentioned, I'm kind of taking the lead for Thurston County on this broadband action team effort. And I'll just jump right in. So what is a broadband action team? And I'll be referring to it as a BAT. The Washington State Broadband Office, which is embedded in the State Department of Commerce, has worked with counties across the state to form these broadband action teams. There are currently 31 BATs across Washington State. And the State Broadband Office really defines this as community-driven collaborations that identify the connectivity and accessibility needs of their community. And the State Broadband Office envisions that the BATs will fulfill a role within their community by centralizing the broadband conversation and directing engagement to the State Broadband Office, that they will connect participants to collaborative project goals, and will be bringing early awareness of community projects to funding opportunities. Because like we have this core group of partners, and we'll hear from the State Broadband Office if there are funding opportunities available, and then work that through our network. And so, as we know, the pandemic exacerbated pre-existing inequalities, including internet access, not just within Thurston County, but across the country. And the already present concern about connectivity became even more urgent. And so there's a recognized need through our partners to begin coordinating a conversation around broadband. And so the State Broadband Office had provided this basic framework and purpose for gathering these partners together. So we brought together a core group of partners to begin meeting as the Thurston BAT. And this included the partners you see on the screen: TRPC, Thurston County, Thurston EDC, Port of Olympia, Nisqually Indian Tribe, and Thurston PUD. Our BAT brings together entities that we really identified as filling an implementer role or a supporting role within our regional broadband expansion efforts. And so, for example, Nisqually Indian Tribe is actively pursuing funding for infrastructure projects and are considered in this implementer role, whereas, say, TRPC or EDC are within the supporting roles. And so at this time, there's not funding provided in connection to the group. And so there's no coordinating funds, and we do not require funds from our BAT members either. And so we have met over the summer and just recently really formalized what this group is at the moment and what we think the role will be moving into the future. Our BAT has kind of identified this mission of ensuring equitable access to affordable, reliable, and quality broadband for all Thurston County residents, businesses, and entrepreneurs. And so the intent of the group is really for the BAT partners to work collaboratively to position Thurston County to secure significant resources for building out a broadband network that closes the digital divide and increases digital literacy. And so our strategy to achieve this is to bring together the broadband project implementers that I had mentioned before, and the key support organizations. And so in these meetings, we're sharing updates, knowledge, support opportunities, and try and coordinate efforts to remove any barriers that the implementers may have to these broadband projects. And so our group just recently, I'd like to say a week, maybe a week and a half now, signed an MOU. And in this MOU, we agreed on two main things as a group. That we're going to meet once a month for those activities, sharing information, updates, opportunities, removing barriers, and additionally to collaboratively draft a unified broadband action team letter of support for mutually agreed upon broadband projects as needed. And so, challenges. With all of this said, we're still really putting the pieces together. We're still very much trying to figure out how to evolve as we move forward in a really increasingly complex environment. And so just some examples of these challenges would be navigating implementer relationships within the community. And so as you can imagine, this is complex as we have partners within the BAT that are implementers or may be implementers in the future. And additionally, we have implementers outside of the BAT group as well. And funds are becoming available at multiple levels, and I anticipate there will be competition for funds in the future. And another one, we're finalizing our criteria for what is the BAT asking for when we talk about providing letters of support. And so we're considering how to establish and support coordination on broadband projects and what criteria best aligns our mission to ensure quality, reliable, and affordable broadband across our county. And so that was really a high level view. And I'd be happy to take any more specific questions if anyone has them.
Chair Foster.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I would like to say something about our role. So like I mentioned in the intro, I've been participating on this group since the beginning, and I signed the MOU for TRPC because at the time, what we were committing to really was working and meeting as a broadband action team. And there was this idea of letters of support. And frequently I will sign letters of support for member organizations and others that are doing work to advance the goals, the values, the mission of TRPC, and that's usually pretty straightforward. I bring this up because some of the challenges that Jenica talked about, I think may also pose some challenges for me in terms of signing letters of support. And so this is something that's we're still working out the details of this. This is still a new group, as Jenica said. We're not funded for this coordination, and this is something that we've brought forward for council to consider in our legislative priorities. It's something that I know the county is bringing forward as part of their legislative priorities. The fact that we've got a lot of work going on around broadband access, but we do not have a structure in place for coordinating this work. And we're already starting to potentially see some of the implications of that. And so I'm very cognizant of making sure that when I sign something on behalf of the council, it's not a policy sort of decision, because that's for you all to make. And so this is something I'll need to continue to watch and make sure that that I'm acting truly in the right way for you all as our council.
Thank you, Mark. Let's go
I
with
have one
Cheryl.
comment.
Sorry, I was looking at our resources. So Mark, we're here, we have 2 to 3, soon to be 4 digital online resources for digital literacy. So please to look to us for that component of it. We set aside about $500,000 a year just for online resources. But we have a wide array of there's one that's called Universal Class. Another one is called LinkedIn Learning that is paid for by the state library for all the public libraries in the state. We're soon to be getting something called North Star Digital Literacy, also funded by the state for all public libraries in the state. And that has been an award-winning online platform for digital literacy. So please don't reinvent the wheel when you get to that part. We're here to help.
Thank you.
All right, let's move over to Commissioner Edwards.
Yes, just as a follow-up to what Mark was talking about this thing is in its infancy and kind of coming together and who signs what. But I just wanted to mention that we had, the county has signed a memorandum of understanding with the tribe. And that has to do with their move towards the Chehalis tribe from Yelm. And after we did that, we got contact, and WAVE is the private entity, I think, working with the tribe on this. But after that was done, then we got contacted by both one of the local phone companies, Tenino Telecompany I don't know what their name is exactly, and Comcast. And they were both looking for memorandum agreements to get in on the action. So there's a bunch of interest coming down the pike. I've asked legal, to give us some kind of a review of what does that really mean. Everybody's kind of positioning, it looks like, maybe to get the ball rolling. So it looks like there's going to be a lot of interest. I just wanted to pass that on.
Thank you. Let's go to Commissioner Zeta and then Cynthia.
I want to apologize for turning my video off at times. I have an unstable connection and I can hear you better when I turn my video off. I want to thank you, Mark, and everybody who's been involved for moving the Broadband Action Team forward. The Port of Olympia has also signed Memorandum of Understanding with the Nisqually Tribe, and special thanks to the Nisqually Tribe for moving forward on implementation, doing the study for South County over to Chehalis. One of the questions I have is if you have an idea about how much you need in initial funding from the partners. The Port of Olympia the commissioners are now discussing how much we might be able to contribute toward funding. We're trying to figure out a way to get this into our budget now for next year. So if we have an idea about what the needs are, that would be useful.
Thank you. Cynthia?
So I wanted to say, this was looked at by the PUD a number of years ago, and a report was finished, but it didn't go very far because of partly funding. And, we found where gaps were in our jurisdictions and looked at and stuff. But with it being more countywide, I think it'll have more impact because there's some major gaps in broadband utilization, and so I'm pleased that we're looking at that. And I'm certainly the tribes is a really important element in this, I think, too.
Thank you. Hillary, then Chris.
Yeah, thanks for sharing a little bit about this work. I think we've kind of talked about this before, and so I'm going to sort of lump school districts in together. Sorry, Gretchen and Mel, but so school districts think about this all the time. And I just want to sort of like drop something down here that encourages you to really connect in deep and meaningful ways with the experts in districts, especially around issues like digital literacy. So we don't just have platforms, we have like teachers who are certified to teach this and have a deep level of expertise. And we've been funding that for years and years. I think the other thing that's really critical, and I know that I think the PUD has reached out at least to our CIO, is to get really good data with specific demographic detail about where the needs are. Entering into those kinds of agreements with your local school district is going to get you the drill down data that you're not going to get from an open survey. So we can connect that information about connectivity to our specific households, and we can know more detail about their economic background, their racial and ethnic identity, their level of education. Lots of those things are pieces of information that will really help move this work forward from an equity perspective. And then the other thing I would say too that I think is important is that sometimes the information we get about our communities comes from, a lot of the time it comes from census data. And while that's really useful, I think one of the really important things that school districts bring to the conversation is that we have a deep knowledge of who's in our catchments, which is different than census data. So it almost gives you a little bit of a window into the future. So if you look at the census data for the neighborhood where I live in West Olympia, it looks a lot whiter than our schools look in West Olympia. And that gives us a little bit of a window into how our community is evolving and changing, and how the cultural and economic needs of our community 10 years from now are going to be really different from what they are now. And so I want to rah-rah the work, but just also really encourage deep collaboration with people who have been doing the work for sometimes decades and also have a lot of deep dive information about the folks who are most impacted by the lack of broadband service.
Thanks, Hillary. Chris?
Hey, everybody. Just want to follow up on what was mentioned about the study done earlier. It was done with the 3 cities, and there were proposed projects, though none of them got initiated. But we did work together on trying to do pilot projects of different sorts. We have focused on the educational districts in the county that are mostly rural in our most recent survey as far as our outreach goes. And I'll just remind people that you're dealing with a capacity problem here. Like people are talking about with electricity recently, because of people moving over to electric cars, maybe faster than we think, and energy switching where it's being used from fossil fuels to other sources. One of the things that I'll point out to you is that, if we had easy distribution of broadband, it would have been here by now. So in the rural areas where it isn't financially feasible for the private sector to reach out to everybody, we've tried to figure out other programs to do it. Right now, the infrastructure exists as far as the main connection to our county through NOAANET, which is just Northwest Open Access Network. They exist along the BPA power lines that run through our county, north up the peninsula, south to Vancouver, and north up to Tacoma and Seattle. And they're the main framework that everybody connects to, including the cell phone towers, folks. Everybody connects to that system. It's got the highest capacity. So it's just a matter of building out infrastructure from that to the neighborhoods who need it, and getting LUDs or other ways along with the arterials out to service people. And of course, there are many people interested in it, but I'm just telling you exactly how it would be implemented, because I don't think people understand that the mainframe structure is already here. It's servicing Seattle, Tacoma, utilities up on the peninsula, et cetera. Even Grays Harbor, which has an excellent system, so does Mason, so does Kitsap. So we're a little behind the ball on this. That's all I've got.
Thanks, Chris. Jenica is going to make it happen. So, any other questions?
Chair
Yes, Mark?
Foster, I guess
Yes.
the one thing I'd add on to this is one of the things that, and one of the reasons that this presentation is timely is because there are grants that are out now, and one of the grant, and I think Jenica mentioned this, one of the grants is in their scoring criteria they have put in, does a broadband action team exist in your area? If yes, do you have a support letter from that broadband action team? And they get points for that, obviously. And so we've got this added challenge of, we are just now standing up this broadband action team, and yet there's already in this grant program this scoring criteria about, do you have the support of your broadband action team? So we're trying to kind of work out the rules for this BAT, while we're also trying to help people with this first round of grant funding. So we're trying very hard to make sure we're not picking winners and losers, but also not disadvantaging anyone by the fact that our BAT is new.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, absolutely. To be continued for sure. So if Aiden is ready, he's going to give us hopefully the good news about the state of our system safety.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to start sharing my screen here.
There you go.
Hopefully everyone can see that all right. Great. Muted myself. Thank you all for joining me today. Good morning. My name is Aiden Dixon. I'm a planner here at the Thurston Regional Planning Council. And today we're going to be talking about the state of our system here in Thurston County, and briefly statewide, specifically on the issue of transportation safety. I'm going to stop my video just because with me streaming this data, I feel like it might be more efficient. So I'll start with the agenda here. We're going to begin with a very brief overview of federal transportation safety funding generally. We're going to talk about Washington's Target Zero, some of what's going on at the state level to address safety on the roadway. Next, we're going to take a look at some transportation safety performance measure data trends, both in Thurston County and statewide, as well as some safety data trends that are specifically looking at road users and high-risk activities on the roadway. We have some time allotted for questions at the end, but this is a discussion, so please feel free to interject at any time if you have a question or anything like that. I can get to it. All right, so let's dive in. So let's start with that brief general overview of how roadway safety is set up on a federal level. So this is nationwide. We have the Highway Safety Improvement Program. It's basically just a federal program. It allows states and the local governments within them to target safety funds to their most critical safety needs, whatever they may be. The HSIP is what it's called. It requires a data-driven and strategic approach to improving highway safety with a specific focus on performance. So the gray piece is the HSIP. Now, each state has to come up with its own HSIP underneath the federal kind of umbrella. And along with that, that blue piece that you're looking at is a strategic highway safety plan, which is our Washington's Target Zero. We also have some other pieces that are not relevant to discussion today, but they also kind of fit into this larger kind of framework of how the federal government distributes money to states and local governments with relation to safety. So to obligate these funds, a state needs to develop a highway safety plan, which is called Target Zero in Washington State. You can visit the website right there. It's basically it's the 5th version of the safety roadmap. It was recently released in 2000. The most recent versions in 2019. Data from the most recent 3 years show, unfortunately, that our state's traffic fatality and serious injury trend is going in the wrong direction. It's going up. More people, unfortunately, getting hurt and killed on the roadway. This is not unique to Washington. I am personally, my professional experience brings me from Illinois, and we are experiencing the same thing in Illinois, and nationwide. We are also experiencing an increase in traffic fatalities. So in recognition of these increases, our addition of Target Zero in Washington in 2019 was written to be more strongly action focused. If you want to take some time and take a look at maybe later in the day or whenever you have it, you can take a look at the website and peruse Target Zero. It's got a lot of really interesting information about how we might be able to address fatalities and serious injuries on the road. One of these is called the Safe System Approach. It is basically an approach to safety on the roadway that differs from conventional safety practices by being more human-centered. Now, what does this mean? It seeks safety through a more aggressive use of vehicle or roadway design and operational changes, rather than relying primarily on behavioral changes. By fully integrating the needs of all users, such as pedestrians, bicyclists, older, younger, disabled, etc., of the transportation system. So an example could be, you're distracted and you're driving, even a moment, it can prevent you from seeing a vulnerable road user. Separating vulnerable road users, such as pedestrians and bicyclists, from traffic reduces the likelihood that these errors will lead to a deadly collision. So, we can go after these high-risk behaviors, and that will definitely have success. However, it's about the design of the roadway as well. And so that can have a big effect on safety. So the question becomes how we're doing. We'll get to that in a second. The story is not great, but we can have a discussion about that in a second. Now, just a brief overview of our safety performance measures. The federal government has agreed that these, has agreed that these 5 safety performance measures represent the most serious and kind of the most trackable incidents on the roadway. And to that extent, all states and the DOTs were required to report and establish data related to these performance measures, and that's what we use to essentially see how we're doing on the roadway with regards to safety. We have number of fatalities. We've got the rate of fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. We've got serious injuries, and then we've got the rate of serious injuries. And then finally, we have the number of non-motorized fatalities on the roadway as well. So these performance measures, they're basically just indicators that enable decision makers like yourselves, along with other stakeholders, to monitor changes in the system. They provide greater accountability to policymakers. They increase organizational focus on safety priorities. So they have a number of positive benefits. They essentially will provide standardized measurements for the purpose of carrying out the Highway Safety Improvement Plan, and to also assess fatalities and serious injuries on public roads. So I'm going to be throwing a couple of graphs and charts at you for here. They're pretty simple to understand, but if you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt. We're just going to begin with the first performance measure of a simple raw count of fatalities. Before we begin, this is a 5-year rolling average. So you see the number of fatalities for each year at the bottom of the graph. And then you have the rolling average, which is in the black. You have the future. The most recent data is 2020. We have data that's coming out for 2021, 2022 soon. But right now, this is the most recent data that we have. The blue and the red are in the future right now, and they would be the numbers that we would need to meet both as a county above and then as statewide below in order to remain or to get on track to accomplish Washington Vision Zero's kind of goal for us. So as you can see, statewide and in our county, fatalities, raw counts are going up. They have been going up slowly but steadily over the past 5 years. And this is also the case statewide as well. So we track pretty similarly to what's going on around the state here in Thurston County. This is a rate of fatalities. So we're just dividing it by vehicle miles traveled, understanding that counties like King County and Pierce County are going to have more vehicle miles traveled than places like Thurston County or Lewis County, et cetera. So I'm trying to standardize these numbers, and the story is essentially the same. The rate is increasing both statewide and in the county. Next, we're going to move to serious injuries. Serious injuries pretty self-explanatory. However, it's essentially an incident where a person did not die on scene or at the hospital, but they encountered a serious injury that has affected their life. It was not a scratch. It was something that was very serious, et cetera. So as you can see, the rate is increasing statewide and in Thurston County as well. It's a slow increase, but it is a steady increase, and it is going the wrong way. Last year's data, we didn't meet the performance benchmark for 2020 in Thurston County, and the state did not meet its performance benchmark as well. And it looks like we might not meet it for 2021 as well. Now we're looking at a serious injury rate. Again, the story is the same, a slow and steady increase over the past 5 years, maybe even longer. So it doesn't look like the state will meet its performance benchmark for 2021 either. Finally, our last benchmark, our last performance measure are non-motorist fatalities and serious injuries. Again, the story is pretty similar to all the ones previous. We are experiencing a slow and steady increase statewide. The numbers are a little bit more variable in Thurston County, just because our overall numbers are fairly low. However, it's more of a plateau. However, it's not going down as quickly as we would like. So it is something to be concerned about. Here we go. Excuse me, sorry, I got a little, there we go. So we're moving now, we moved away from our performance measures, and now we're gonna take a look at some data related to high-risk behavior on the roadway in Thurston County. This data was provided to us by the Washington Traffic Safety Commission and analyzed by us to take a look at what kinds of things are going on in the county. Now, we have our performance measures, and those are the federal government reporting standards. These ones are specifically related to categories that can be found in Target Zero, identifying these specific areas of high-risk behavior. Now we've got distraction, so on your cell phone, you're talking to somebody in the car, impairment, this could be alcohol or cannabis or any other kind of substance, speeding, people not wearing their seatbelts, and then the total. So this year in 2020, we've had 18 fatalities in Thurston County. The graphs on the right side kind of give you a trend. It's not really important to look at these percentages. What I would direct your attention to is these raw counts, and then more to these trend lines that kind of give you an idea generally of what's going up and what's going down. As you can see, we'll have a better comparison in a later slide, but for now, just like to point your attention to the fact that we're not seeing any kind of precipitous decline in any of these categories, which would be great to see. These counts are really low. So in Thurston County, potentially you're dealing with single digits here. So trends are apparent over a long enough period of time. However, I would caution any kind of conclusion that could potentially be drawn from these just because the counts are very low. So the variability can be very high. However, if you look at the totals below, you can kind of see that we are experiencing a general increase in fatalities with regards to these specific behaviors on the roadway in Thurston County. This is statewide for the same categories. We track pretty well, generally speaking, very similarly to the state in almost all of the categories. The state is also seeing impairment and related driving deaths increasing. It's also seeing distraction involved. Well, it's kind of like a plateau, but it's seeing understream vehicle occupants going up, and then overall these categories are increasing as well. Now we're going to take a quick look at road users. Now we looked at high risk activities like distracted driving and impaired driving, but now we're going to take a look at road users in the county. We're looking at heavy trucks, motorcyclists, older drivers that are 70 and above. We've got walkers and bicyclists, younger drivers that are 16 to 25, and then total. We are seeing generally plateaus or increases in all these categories except younger drivers, potentially seeing a decrease in them. However, these numbers are very low to begin with. So over time, you could probably extrapolate something, just be cautious about what you say. Now these trends are pretty much carry over to Washington statewide. We are seeing increases in all of these categories, specifically with walkers and bicyclists, older drivers, and heavy trucks as freight, specifically semi-freight becomes more common on the roadway, first mile, last mile things. We'll have those trucks becoming more of an issue. Now, that was a lot of data to throw at you, and it's hard to kind of compare these. So I put them together. This is high risk behavior. We're comparing statewide and Thurston County right now. And as you can see, what I just said before kind of rings true. We've got these trends are very similar. Distracted driving is generally kind of experiencing a slow decrease in Thurston County and also statewide. We've got speeding also kind of plateauing, not really increasing or decreasing. However, impairment is experiencing increases in statewide and countywide as well. Excuse me. So we're looking at a comparison of road users here. So we've seen this before. However, I'm going to put it right next to each other just to give you all a better way to just quickly compare these two. We have statewide on the left and Thurston County on the right. Again, the county tracks very well with the state with regards to its experiences in these categories. Other counties do not track like this at all. So this is neither a good or a bad thing. This is just, going to show that the issues that the state is experiencing, we are also experiencing in the county. One potential area that sees a difference is, young drivers statewide are experiencing an increase in fatalities, unfortunately, whereas in Thurston County, we can kind of see perhaps a slight decrease in the number of young drivers involved in roadway fatalities over the past 10 years or so. However, when you combine all of these categories together, you are experiencing an increase. So not the news that we want to hear, unfortunately, but it is not a news story, and it is a story that is happening in many states across the country and nationwide as well. So that was intended to be kind of an overview of the data and what we're experiencing here. Any questions, I would be glad to try to answer them. Thank you so much for your time.
Chair Foster, you were muted, I think, when you called on someone.
Cynthia had a question for you, Aiden.
I did. It's mainly, I'm rather surprised that the totals for unrestrained fatalities and accidents is actually going up, after, well, I don't say millions, but many, many, many years of having to wear seatbelts. I just thought that it's sort of like the automatic thing of locking your car door as you walk away. You don't think about it. So I'm really surprised at that. I mean, did that come as a surprise to you?
Unfortunately, yes, it did come as a surprise. I would agree with you. It seems common sense. However, unfortunately, a lot of us seem to lose our common sense when we enter into a vehicle. So it's unfortunate, but it is the case. I feel like, there are many different ways to attack these issues with regards to these different categories, public awareness campaigns, enforcement activities, and we can have a discussion about possible ways to address these things. But yeah, it did come as a surprise to me as well.
Chris, then Malcolm, then Helen.
Aiden, thanks for the report. I was just wondering what breakdown is between local roads and state highways, like especially our well-traveled ones like I-5 and 101. The reason is because while we've had many more rotaries and I guess traffic circles go in to prevent T-bone accidents, which harm people much more, we've still had a much higher volume come through our roadways, especially vacationing on the peninsula, both east and west, and also more commuters coming from the west, McCleary, Mason County, even Steamboat Island. And the density of that interchange, which is highly hazardous, but interchange with Highway 8 needs to be fixed because it's a problem 7 days a week now, not just on weekends and not just during commuter time. So it's going to only get worse as our county continues to grow. Thank you.
I agree with you. The breakdown between state roads and local roads, that's not the information I have right now. This is just all roads in Thurston County, including tribal roads and state roads and local roads. But it is a piece of information that could probably be provided later on.
Hey, Aiden, I enjoyed your presentation. There's a lot of information in there. And as you're going through the information, I'm trying to establish correlations in my mind, like, with social things that have happened, like when weed became legal, when we started saying that, if you're holding a phone, you get a ticket, these types of things. And as I look at your graphs to see, what actions and activities that I'm aware of may have some type of impact on the way you're charting information. And then to Chris's point, there are a lot of very dangerous roads in the state of Washington. I remember when Highway 18 was the #1 road for fatalities in the state, and then we began to address that. So I know that there's a lot of roads that are still very dangerous, and we live in a very we have a lot of hills and a lot of blind spots, a lot of corners, and a lot of rain. And I know it causes us more, causes us more fatalities than some of the other states that are a little more flat and you can see for longer distances and so on and so forth. But have you guys like been able to draw any correlations or kind of, as we do different legislations and try to enforce and enact different laws, are you seeing any of these numbers change?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. Human behavior is a central component in many, if not all, of these crashes that result in serious injuries and fatalities. And you're spot on. We have a lot of environmental factors in the state that make it quite frankly, a more dangerous place to drive than, I'm from Illinois. It's very flat. And, we don't get as much rain. It's something that I had to adjust to. And human behavior definitely has a part to play. I would make the assertion that the way that we design our roadways could put us is maybe an often underlooked or maybe an overlooked part of how these factor in to improving roadway safety. It's actually just how you. We're doing a project at TRPC called it's a Rural Mobility Project. We're looking at rural roads in Thurston County that are outside the urbanized area, and trying to identify intersections and corridors that experience a higher degree of crashes that might result in fatalities and serious injuries, and kind of what roadway designs we can come up with to alleviate these problems or kind of address them in any way. So the amount of research that I've done on other states, they've kind of come to the conclusion that, we can pursue, and it is a worthy goal to pursue human behavior. Drinking and driving it's a no-brainer. Don't do it. It's going to result in something terrible happening on the roadway. We all know this. But designing these roadways in recognition of the fact that realistically you won't be able to stop everybody from drinking and driving. What could you do with regards to how you design the roadway to make a potential accident only a potential one and not an actual one? So I don't know if that answered your question, but it is something that many states are currently kind of grappling with, and it is becoming, and it is a pretty immediate concern. We looked at that data, and those trends are going in the wrong direction. We don't want them to keep increasing, because that means that people's lives are being lost, and it's a very real issue. So
Aiden, very briefly, I really like Malcolm's idea of potentially noting on some of these graphs some of those key policy changes, like when we first enacted distracted driving laws, when we bolstered those distracted driving laws, when marijuana was legalized. I think some of those key policies that relate to these data, we could take a look and see how we might represent those, because they're logical questions that come to people's minds when they look at these data.
Sure. Yeah, they definitely have had effects, and we can definitely notate that. And I think it would provide a bit more of an in-depth kind of look at what's going on here.
Right. Let's see what Helen has to say.
Thanks. Thank you, Aiden. Yeah, to add to the theme of rural, urban, and mapping, I was thinking about the state health disparity map. Might be another thing to look at, because one of the elements that is measured in the health disparity map is traffic fatalities and injuries. So you can kind of get a picture of the county, and especially the urban rural disparities. It's one of the things that makes rural counties rank high on the disparity map, is actually the traffic issue. So that's another thing that you might want to take a look at.
Thanks so much, Helen. I'll take a look at that.
Carolyn?
I wanted to ask Aidan if there had been any recent talk of trying to separate big truck traffic from other vehicles using particularly I-5. We're, the trends are certainly moving away from big box stores commercially, which means more vehicles transporting goods to regional fulfillment centers. And that seems to be a growing trend. So just curious to see if there's any more thought being given to how we might separate that out a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not aware of any movement that's been done to divide heavy truck traffic. I do know, it's something that I can take a look at and provide you with some more information later. I do know that, as nationwide, we are experiencing an increase in semis and freight truck traffic on highways. It's only going to get more and more prevalent as goods become shipped and as fulfillment of last or first and last day services from Amazon and the like. We've got a big logistics area in Lacey on the east side of the county. It is only going to grow. The Martin Way Corridor study is currently has current conditions report out. There is a segment of the report on freight. It deals a lot with that specific area. It's definitely an issue that is going to become more important as the county grows and as that kind of sector ends up growing more. So it is on our radar for sure.
I like the radar reference. You said something early on, Aidan, and yet we didn't repeat it at all. I think the common factor in all of these things is the human decisions that are being made while they're operating a deadly vehicle. And so once again, it looks like we should really be putting our efforts into taking those human decision factors out by talking more about connected, autonomous vehicles.
Well, yeah. Chair Foster, that is a great teaser for my presentation a little later in the agenda. So thank you for that.
Well, that's what I do here, Mark. Are there any? That is going to be the future of us, and it's going to save lives, but we'll get there. Any other questions for Aidan? The only other question I had for you, Aidan, is what the heck happened in 2018 in Thurston County? What?
I myself, was wondering that as well. It was perhaps a strange. I mean, I wasn't here that year, so maybe you all could tell me what went on. There seemed to be, and this is consistent with 2018 statewide as well. I was originally kind of concerned that there might have been a reporting error for the data, but after speaking to the Washington State Traffic Commission, I can assure you all there was no error in reporting data, and maybe 2018 was just a special year. I'm not sure.
When did recreational marijuana get legalized?
I think that was before 2018.
Yeah, 2011, 2012, somewhere around there, I think.
All right, good. Can't blame it for that then. All right, well, great presentation. Those graphs were very enlightening. Appreciate that, Aidan. And folks, we are right at our break time, like literally right at that break time. So let's take that, not 7th inning stretch, but a 7-minute stretch, if that's good enough for everybody. Go and get that coffee balance taken care of, and we'll see you right back here at 9:41.
I'd also just like to quickly say, if anyone is interested in any of these data or graphs for your own purposes, you want to show them to staff members on your council or your departments, feel free to email me. I can provide the information that you need.
Zita said yes, please.
And did your email address get it put in somewhere, or?
Oh yes, you know what? I will. I can send it out. It's Dixona, Dixona @trpc.org.
Well, that was really fast. Dixon A.
Sorry, DIX. Let's just do it for everybody. It's DIXONA IXON A, the letter A, then at trpc.org.
Thank you.
Mark, how did we get Aiden all the way out here from Illinois?
We just got lucky. He was looking to move away from the Chicago area, and he worked for the Metropolitan Planning Organization there in Chicago, one of the bigger ones. And so just been an awesome fit here. I was really happy. That's one of the first time you all have gotten to really hear from Aiden since he's come on more than a year ago.
Wow.
But yeah, I know time flies when you're in a pandemic. So yeah, we're really lucky to have him.
Yeah, very cool.
This is Helen. You know, I was just taking this moment to look. It might be, I didn't make a recording of I didn't take a screenshot, but did the truck accidents increase significantly after 2018? Because I was just noticing that might be when we got the increase in highway freight traffic because of changes at the Port of Portland, where they closed down, I think, one of their terminals, and we started getting more. That's when we started seeing a lot more freight traffic on I-5, in addition to just the changes from you know, how we transport goods.
I don't know the answer to that, Helen, but I'll ask Aiden and we'll get you that information on that.
You know, it just seems like an obvious fact. You put more rats in the box, and there's got to be more problems. And I saw that truck one too, and I saw it was just trending up along a similar line. There was no spike like we saw in the fatalities in Thurston County in 2018, which was probably attributed to by a multiple fatality crash, sending it up 4 or 5 in one incident, and then it leveled out again. But yeah, we're until I'll just keep saying it till you guys make me go away. But until we take the drivers out and put the I don't want to go all Schwarzenegger on us here, but when the machines start taking care of us a little better, I think we're all going to live longer, safer, happier lives. So anyway, we're back. Thanks, everybody. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention this at the beginning. It would be super helpful, especially with new people, especially like in 2022 when we have new representatives coming in, if you would rename yourself to show your affiliation. What city you're from or what agency you're representing would be really helpful to everybody in the viewer world, especially the ones who are just observing this on the YouTube channel, Facebook channel. Well, so thank you. And then Karen, or excuse me, yeah, it is Karen. Karen, it's up to you to tell us how we're going to influence our state legislators this year.
Okay, well, I think Berlina's going to share my screen. So let's get started. And it's coming. We can't ignore it anymore. It will be here. Could we get into presentation mode, Berlina? Thank you. Okay, next slide. This is what last session felt like with the number of issues that we had. It felt like we were going in to meet with legislators and talking really fast and that was true for all of us that went to those meetings. And so we decided we needed, you decided that, whoa, we need some folks to come in and make things a little smoother to really narrow our priorities down. And so next slide. You created a subcommittee with 2 representatives from policy board and 2 representatives from council. These are the people who are on it. For those who don't know, Renee Radcliffe Sinclair, she is a business rep to the Transportation Policy Board. So this group met and said, yes, we have thousands of things we want to ask the legislature. There are things that are bleeding. We need help with a lot of things, but we need to really narrow that down. Next slide. So the subcommittee met and they came up with basically 2 issue areas. And as always, we divided them into little parts because 2 issues didn't feel quite enough. And so the first is transportation, the I-5 to Tumwater to Mounts Road project. This is one, for those who don't know, that we have bringing to the legislature probably the last 6 years at least. And we're talking about the area around the Nisqually bridges. That has been our focus, to look at some NEPA work. We have continued to get funding. I have to thank all of our legislators, but in particular Representative Barkas, who has just been there, continuing to hammer on the need for this funding. And so it's important to step back, though, and remember, it's kind of like the traffic fatality discussion. There isn't any one thing or one solution or one cause. And so as we did the looking at the Tumwater Mounts Road area, we talked about, yes, we do need some funding. We're going to have to deal with the environmental issues that the tribe has invested in finding out about and really narrowing down to what we think is going to happen. So there is that road solution, which is part of this, but we also have to look at alternative routes. We have had the experience with the train derailment of seeing what happens when I-5 is closed, and that we don't have a lot of alternatives to that, and the impacts to our rural communities, in particular Yelm. And then finally, TDM strategies. So transportation demand management strategies, like encouraging telework. We brought a presentation to you not too long ago about how many people were not on the highway because telework was increased at the Capitol campus. So this is the I-5 package. And so we're saying, yes, we need to continue to be funded for I-5. And here's some of the elements. So it is the actual road work, the NEPA, the environmental issues, but it's the alternative routes and the TDM strategies as well. And you'll notice that there's a little green highlighting around that $ in substantial funding. And I'm going to turn this over to Mark for a minute, who's going to talk about that.
Yeah. So just as a reminder, in the last legislative session, so for this biennium, the legislature allocated $5 million to WSDOT to do two main things: preliminary design and National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA review for the project. And the legislature focused on the Nisqually Delta portion of the project for the reasons that Karen just talked about, most notably the issues with salmon habitat and the issues with flood risk. And so with that $5 million, WSDOT has another $1 million left over from the current $2.25 million that we all as a region had been successful in getting from the legislature. And so there's a total of $6 million to do that preliminary design and the National Environmental Policy Act review. WSDOT believes that's sufficient to complete both of those. And so at that point, there's kind of 4 phases of a transportation project that we talk about a lot here. You've kind of got and these are formal, WSDOT and federally recognized. There's a planning phase. There's what they call PE, which is that design and engineering phase. Then you've got right of way, and then you've got construction. The work that we've been funded to do right now it has been that planning work, and we're starting to get into, with environmental review, we're starting to get into some of what's done with that PE phase, that preliminary design and engineering phase. But what we still need is the rest of the money for that PE phase and the right of way. And I've submitted a request to WSDOT for that information, because they're right now working on the final report for the planning and environmental linkages that we've talked about for I-5, which is more of that planning along this line, and the federally required planning for that Pell work. And so when that Pell is supposed to be out later this month, And we're trying to get to a hard number for PE and right of way so that we've got something to talk to the legislature about in terms of what we need for the next steps. Because the fact of the matter is that the environmental review that we have 6 million for, that's going to take at least 2 years to do. But we don't want to lose momentum with the legislature and just, say nothing for the next 2 years. And so that's why we're trying to get a number on this, the next 2 phases, that finishing the PE phase, the preliminary engineering phase, and completing the right-of-way phase. I'm working on an estimate from WashDOT for that right now.
Okay, and it's also, thank you, Mark, and it's also important to remember that we will not do this project without federal funding. There isn't enough local funding or state funding to make this happen. And so that's one of the reasons that we have to follow those federal steps, especially with the environmental work. The other sort of complication is we have the normal every 2-year budgets and the supplemental budgets and all of that. And then we have the legislature talking about a 5 to 10 year transportation package. So that big package that comes along where they have a big list of projects. We don't know if they're going to consider that this year, if they're going to do it next year. So we almost have to have a really clear picture of a very complicated situation. So if you're going to look at a 2-year budget, we need this much. If you're going to look at that big package, we need this much. And that's why we're trying to specifically get the numbers. It works much better if we're able to say, here's what we need and here's when we need it. So next slide. And our other issue sounds very familiar with earlier in our agenda as well, and that is broadband. That what you decided, the policy board members and the council members on the subcommittee, is that broadband is just really critical for dealing with equity. We learned more than we ever believed about the haves and have-nots during COVID when it came to this. And it was school children. It was people trying to have medical appointments online. It was working from home. At every level, we had a huge experience of what broadband looks like and where it doesn't work, and obviously some equity issues there. And so we don't have that number yet. We're still working on that, but we have 2 asks here, and one is to provide continued funding. And then the second is that we want them to not give funding to people that aren't coordinated. And so we have formed a committee. We are working on coordinating. And so if the state is going to give money, we've also mentioned this to our federal delegation, then it should come to communities that are working together, so we don't end up piecemealing this. So those are our 2 asks for the legislature: transportation I-5 with those various parts to it, and then broadband. Next slide. So basically today, we're coming to ask you for sort of a first look. Do you feel like this is what we should be asking for? Should we follow the recommendations of the subcommittee? I will take a step back and say that when we go to meet with legislators, we also talk about their priorities. We also, as the session progresses and we look at bills that are introduced, remember in a off-year session, all the bills that were alive last year are still alive this year. So if we still see a lot of energy coming out about a different issue, we may not add it to the priority list, but we may talk about it with legislators. So this is very fluid, and we want to take advantage when we can of momentum and new things coming forward. But for that initial meeting, that maybe 10 minutes that we get with a legislator, we would like we brought you the subcommittee's recommendations for what that should be. And let me have the next slide, and then we'll go to conversation and questions. So basically, it will go to TPB next week for their review and recommendation. If you want to make changes in the subcommittee recommendation, then we will talk about that. And then we'll bring it to the TPB next week. And then it would be on your consent calendar in December. And we're already starting to make appointments with legislators. If we can get in there after the election, but before the session craziness starts, we can sometimes get 45 minutes or an hour. So we're starting to schedule those meetings. So I would turn it back over to you, Mr. Chair, and the group to look at what the recommendation from the subcommittee and where you'd like to move forward. We also have members of the subcommittee, Clark and JW here, if you'd like to talk about any conversations that we had there.
Thank you, Karen. And just before we go into questions, I'll just remind folks that this is based on our role as the MPO, not specifically to any one of our individual agencies, although it's always tempting to try to get one of ours in there, especially if it's Mr. Ryder. But we try to focus on these things that are from the regional planning perspective rather than to get too down in the weeds about any particular project. But with that, Cynthia, and then we'll go to the commissioners.
So I don't think we can possibly not talk about the Nisqually Bridge Mounts Road thing. We've been doing this for so long, and you just have to keep nagging and nagging and nagging. So that to me is a priority because it's so costly to even to begin, and we have to do this in little chunks. So, and you know, we've been talking about broadband, and the last 2 years has been obvious that we are not dealing with that well, and that's to me a priority. So I'm all for these two, and the more you add, the watered down the others get. So I think it's good to hammer home with those two.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Edwards?
Yes, I want to follow up on what Cynthia just talked about there. And a couple different reasons, I guess. You know, currently when it talks about, when there's talk about the river cutting under I-5 and causing a collapse or a problem, we're talking about 25 years out. But that is based on the fact that kind of things stay as normal, that we don't have situations like the 96 flood, if you will. And FERC, who regulates the power production operations on these dams, currently does not have any type of flood control process included in the licensing up at Alder Lake. So that becomes an issue. If we have another 96 dam or a 96 flood, I mean, we've had other ones that have come along since 96, but if we have another 96 flood and we wash out that base of that bridge, then we're really going to be in a problem. Then, and that's the unknown. So we're talking about we have 25 years, but we really don't have 25 years if we have a disaster on our hands. And I just wonder, Chris gave a little talk from the PUD about where the connectivity was with broadband, and that piece, which goes back to what Cynthia was also talking about. What happens if that bridge, we all know what happens when the highway is blocked and we're not able to use it. But what happens if that bridge actually comes completely out somehow, like a earthquake or a flood? Do we lose that connectivity on our whole broadband's perspective because it's buried in the I-5 corridor? And I just asked that question. If maybe
Mr. Edwards, I can't answer that definitively, but I actually asked that question when we were out on the water with DOT not too long ago, taking a look at this. And what they told me is there is significant utility infrastructure on those I-5 bridges. And they also said that though for those utilities, there are other main lines that come into our region. So if the bridge went out, yes, it would be a major disruption to a number of utility services. What they said though is they don't think we would be down, because it's not like we only have one entry point into our county and it's over those bridges. But I don't want to downplay it either, because they said there are a number of conduits on those bridges bringing telecommunications and other utilities to this area.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks,
Yeah.
Commissioner.
Maybe just to follow up on that, just real quick, Mayor.
Sure.
If we end up in a situation that we do have a 96 flood again, and it's just a little bit worse, then we've got that problem that we're all aware of, that kind of instantly becomes a problem that if we haven't planned for it properly. So I do think that our agenda that we're moving forward in the legislature is very important. But I think in the meantime, we should also be thinking about FERC's role in a lack of flood control requirements with the power production dams, because that's how we ended up with the 96 flood, was not enough proper planning and water release at the right times. And then we had, 3 or 4 days more of a good rain. So we're kind of looking at that from the county's perspective, how that might all fit together. And I just want to bring that up to the group, just so that I think it's all part and parcel, so we don't have some type of a disaster. Thanks.
Thank you.
And what Commissioner Edwards really means by disaster is we lose Stewart's Meats right there along the river. Catastrophe. Commissioner Zita.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen, for that report, and thank you to the subcommittee for drafting those priorities and that strategy. I agree with the subcommittee and Karen and everyone who's spoken so far that it's smart to narrow our ask, focus on the 2 biggest priorities, and I agree that these are the 2 biggest priorities. Cynthia and Gary are right that broadband is a high priority for communication, for our economy, and for equity. Gary's right that the bridge could fail sooner than 15 years. Climate change is making extreme weather happen more often, and it's happening worse. Even with more dam management along the Nisqually, that's not going to save us, because extreme weather is getting worse. So great work, strongly support the priorities.
Thank you. In my list here, we've got Chris, then Hillary, then Heidi.
Thank you. I'd like to applaud what Gary said about water. He has drawn attention to water, whether it be flooding or groundwater in our county, and protecting that resource. Want to point out to staff that we may be losing a senior legislator after this session, which is Senator Sheldon.
Yep.
I don't think he's running again. He's indicated a while back that he wasn't going to next year. And he sits on the Transportation Committee. So I would use that while we have it, for at least this next section. And I will remind people also that the Highway 8 interchange is in his district too. But I just want to point out about the question Gary had about fiber. The NOAANET fiber system runs along the BPA lines. It was paid for as security for those lines to know when outages occurred along the main transmission system of Bonneville Power. It runs, the NOAANET lines run only along the main transmission lines, not across the bridge. So just so you know that. And as you know, it goes through Yelm area.
What doesn't? Thank you, Chris. Hillary?
Yeah, thanks. I just want to express appreciation. I agree. I was looking back at before the meeting, looking back at last year's priorities. And I also think that one of the things that made last year really difficult is there were so many needs and we didn't really know what the solutions were. So we were like, I don't know, fix childcare, right? See how that goes. So I appreciate the specificity of the asks, because I think that also is really helpful. The one question I had for Karen and the work group members who are here that I was just curious about is, housing has been so huge in our conversations for the past many years, and it doesn't show up in this set of recommendations. So I don't know if you feel like you can speak to sort of the discussion you had and how you ended up not including something specifically about housing in the recommendations for this year.
I think more than anything, one, it was trying to focus, but it was also that we are really looking at area-specific solutions to housing. The what will work in Yelm is very different than what might work in Olympia, and so it feels as though we don't have an ask that is very defined. We're still at the give us some money for housing for people who are homeless, as well as people who are can't afford to be in houses, and so it just didn't feel cooked enough this year to bring that forward. We always will say something like, hey, there's other issues. Housing clearly is still an issue, and we're working to bring you more specific asks. But the conditions have worsened in so many areas that in talking to the providers, in talking to the people that are looking at this, it just didn't feel like there was enough gelled to make an ask. You know, give us more money. We will always say that. We will need more money no matter what it is for. But I'd really like to have, and this is what we'd heard from legislators, if the region had a pilot that they were moving forward, that we could say we want funding for this pilot because we think this has the most potential to make things happen.
I'd like to add one piece to that, because there was also a lot of discussion in the subcommittee about really emphasizing the areas that are most clearly TRPC issues, and so that was also part of it. And what I mean by that is you're absolutely right, Hillary. We spend a lot of time talking about housing, and so if out of the Regional Housing Council or out of the Housing Action Team or one of those other venues that we have for those housing discussions, there came out a clear ask, then I think it's easy for us to discuss having that be part of our package. But there was a real recognition with the subcommittee in terms of the priorities that we define. We should really emphasize those areas that are most closely aligned to TRPC's mission.
Thanks, Mark. Heidi?
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to, well, I want to say hi, but also, you know, I really like the focus on the I-5 corridor, of course, from the Nisqually perspective, but, you know, because it not only impacts the bridge, of course, but also the traffic out here in Yelm when the I-5 fails. But also, I know it doesn't come from an MPO perspective, but just wanted to put a little pin in everybody's mind about also the effects on the salmon that's going on down there and the estuary and the water temperatures and the salination of the water. So just keep that in your mind as well from the tribe's perspective.
Okay.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Heidi, because when we talk about climate change and we're thinking about flooding down the Nisqually, we also have to remember what it runs into. And as the sea level rises, the river can't get out, so and it backs up and it aggravates the entire problem. So
right.
Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Clark?
I want to appreciate all of the comments. I think it's great. And I just wanted to briefly address Hillary's question about what else, because I actually think, you know, there's a lot of good work we do around housing and land use. But what I heard from our legislative delegation was in this short session, where we already know they're going to continue social justice, equity, police reform discussions, that their plates are super full, and that one place where we might have an important role to engage is if they have the opportunity to consider a transportation package, and that's where we should put our energy and be prepared to engage and work together with our delegation. So that's my version of why we narrowed it down to such a specific ask. Is that was the legislators' advice of what might be most impactful this short session.
Mr. Chair, I would also say that we have our work cut out for us, and we might think about the subcommittee meeting after session is over as we start putting together our legislative ask for next year, that maybe because it's the long session, that maybe the subcommittee could be interested in continuing to have a conversation. How did things work? What do we need to add? And so I think that would be really helpful. You know, we're planning for the 2023 session now. So let's really be organized in that planning. And I mean 2023 as well as 2022. What does that big budget year look like for us?
All right, we all have fun with that.
Well, clearly, Chair Foster will not be on the subcommittee, but I'm sure we will have one.
Absolutely. And just one final thought on this that we took into consideration. These, and if it hadn't been said before, these priorities align so nicely with the main priorities of our other regional players, like South Sound Military and Communities Partnership and JBLM, and quite a few of the smaller jurisdictions. So they're going to hear the same story asked from different angles, and I think that will be very impactful to them. So, yeah, and thank you to Karen, because she's very good at talking with these legislators. She knows intuitively how to get their attention and put our mission, our values forward. So thank you, Karen, for that.
Okay, and I think we have no changes. So you're giving a general thumbs up. This is an action item, and I can report that to Transportation Policy Board next week. Is that correct? Okay, I'm seeing nods. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Okay, let us go then to the future of logistics and next steps for autonomous vehicles. All right.
All right. So hopefully you're all seeing my screen. Yes. Good. Okay. So I'll warn you ahead of time. I'm kind of excited to give this one. So I'm going to be nerding out a little bit on all of you. I added this kind of late. I brought this to the officers because while we were meeting on this agenda, I was attending a 2-day workshop. It was the Washington State Transportation Commission's. It was their usual meeting time, but they spent their October meeting focusing on the future of logistics and automated transportation. And as folks hopefully remember, this has been a council priority that we really stay on top of what's going on in terms of technology and transportation. And so we've been doing that. And I've been participating in the Washington State Transportation Commission for the past probably close to 3 years now. They've been tasked with a bunch of different work groups working on how do we bring cooperative automated transportation technology to our state. I've been participating on the infrastructure group, but there's also been like 5 or 6 other groups. And so this was bringing all of those pieces together along with some really great experts that are working in this state. And so I thought I wanted to bring this to folks. I'm going to kind of go over a day and a half of presentations in 15 minutes. So I'm going to truly give you the highlights of this, but there was a lot of really good information in this. And so the Washington State Transportation Commission, they partnered with ACES, and ACES is a coalition of business interests that are working together on ACES stands for, and this is their mission, to bring automated, connected electric and shared vehicle technologies to the Puget Sound region. That's ACES. And then they also are working with Pacific Northwest Economic Region, which is a coalition of states and provinces in Canada working on economic development together. And it was a really good 2 days. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we heard about supply chain issues. Slightly unrelated, but it was heavy on people's minds, and I took away some good kind of snapshots on this. And it was one of the commissioners from the Northwest Seaport Alliance, which is the coalition of Port of Seattle and Port of Tacoma, that spoke on this and talked about what's going on with our supply chain and how did we get where we're at. And one of the some of what she talked about, I'd heard, but not kind of as succinctly as she put it. And what she talked about was how in late 2019 and early 2020, our manufacturing around the globe came to a halt. And when that happened, that was especially difficult on the logistics community, boat shipping in particular, because that system works where some boats are in port, some boats are in the middle of the high seas, and it's kind of this delicate, when I'm in port, you're out to sea. When you're at port, or you know what I'm trying to say. And so when everything stopped, these ships didn't have anywhere to go. And so they found places to go. But what that did was that put the ships out of position for where they should be. And it also put the containers out of position of where they should be. And it's interesting because they really highlighted containers right now are a big part of the problem. They're just all out of whack. They're not where they should be because of this time period where so many ships were just going to wherever they could find moorage because they were out of their usual routine of just dock and go. At the same time, we already were suffering a truck driver shortage, and we lost another 100,000 truck drivers over the past year and a half. And 70% of freight that comes through our ports goes on a truck at some point in time to get to its final destination. And so that's been a major issue. We saw huge spikes in consumer demand as finances weren't as much of an issue for some. And so their spending went up as they were bored at home. And we all heard a lot about that. And so one of the things they highlighted, and granted this is to 2020, but cargo volumes are up significantly over 2020. So it's not that we're not moving things through the port. It's these difficulties of the truck driver shortage, the ships being still working to get kind of back into the system the way it's supposed to work, and all of those things compounding to cause some of the supply chain issues that we've had. Okay, so next we talked about truck transport, because that was the big issue that we just mentioned for the supply chain issue. PACCAR was there. PACCAR is a freight leader that's based here in the state in Bellevue. And they are a leader in trying to bring electric technologies to big rig, to the Class 8, to the big tractor trailer trucks. And they've done several pilot projects. They've got a testing facility here in the state where they're working on electric, they're working on autonomous, they're working on just transforming the shipping industry, the freight industry, land freight. So they've done several pilot projects in Los Angeles, Port of Los Angeles, looking at electric and hydrogen trucks. With that pilot, they found about 175-mile range for the electric trucks, about 350-mile range for the hydrogen trucks. The driver experience, the drivers really liked them, good power, good handling. They had lower maintenance costs. Apparently the hydrogen's easier to fill than diesel. So there were parts of that they liked. The downsides were the infrastructure and getting it all set up is costly, is time consuming. and the specialized training that mechanics need. And we've talked about that before at this, is that's one of the issues that we have is transferring from gas consuming to electric vehicles. We're going to have a steep learning curve for those that know how to work on those vehicles. Even though they're simpler and easier to maintain, they're still new. So that's an issue. PACCAR's working on autonomous trucking as well. And they're working with a company called Aurora. And Aurora has a product called Aurora Driver. And Aurora is working with more than just PACCAR. They're working with all kinds of companies all around the world. But their focus is the autonomous driving technology. And it's interesting because some of what they talked about is with some of the challenges that some of the companies have faced, some of the tests had faced, fatalities in testing of automated technologies. Public support of adopting automation has dipped. And so there's a recognition that there's a need to show the effectiveness, the safety, the benefit of these technologies to the public. And so there's been a lot more focus on freight and on mobility as a service. So on fleets, on taxis, on Uber, on Lyfts, on those being the areas where we focus for autonomous technologies. And when we can demonstrate safety, efficiency, benefit there, that will help then with adoption of the general consumer. And so they're working with PACCAR so they've got two products. Aurora Horizon is their driverless technology for trucks. Aurora Connect is their driverless technology for more standard vehicles. And they're working on bringing both of those to market. Well, they're already ready for market, bringing both of those to actual use cases as soon as possible. They're testing them right now. There's a partnership with PACCAR, FedEx, and Aurora Driver. They're not testing in this state, but they are testing package delivery with a fully autonomous truck, electric truck based on the PACCAR platform. So pretty exciting changes there. And a big part of this is truck platooning that we've talked about. So basically in truck platooning, and this relates to Carolyn's question earlier today, in truck platooning, there's a driver in the first truck. Well, this is one of the earlier stages of truck platooning, the way it's envisioned. There's a driver in the first truck. There either could be or ultimately wouldn't be a driver in the following trucks. And they'd be probably platoons of 3 trucks, at least to start. And so there's a driver operating the first truck. The next 2 trucks are simply playing follow the leader using technology. So they're not completely on their own because they're following a human-driven vehicle, but they are on their own in terms of they're on their own to play follow the leader with that vehicle. And the idea behind those is, actually, I think, oh, I didn't include those in here, did I? No. Some of the statistics on this is they can reduce emissions substantially. They can cut driver costs substantially by having this platoon set up. And it also helps us deal with the driver shortage. So that's one of the use cases that people think are going to be the first in many areas, is this idea of truck platooning. We also talked about last mile freight. University of Washington did a really cool pilot project where they looked at 2 technologies, basically a common locker, which is just, and you see it here, and it's this box where they put this in front of apartment buildings or other businesses. And instead of the delivery driver taking it to the door of each place within, or taking it into the lobby to the mail area, however the building works. They simply are putting these packages in this common locker, and the person's given a code to access their package. And that pilot program, they found that it reduced the time that the delivery driver spent in the building by 50%, and it reduced the time that that delivery truck is at the curb in front of that building by 33%. So pretty significant changes simply by having all of those packages go to this common locker that's at the street level. They also looked at electric bikes, electric cargo bikes, and that's what you see in this bottom left. This is one of the actual pilot cargo bikes that they used, and they used these in the Seattle area to deliver packages instead of trucks. They found that they could reduce by half the vehicle miles traveled per package by use of a bike, because they could just pick much more efficient routes than cars can in many ways. It reduced tailpipe emissions by 30%, and they actually found that, especially in these dense Seattle type of environment, that they were more efficient than trucks. They could get the same deliveries done with 7 e-bikes as they got done with 10 trucks. And a lot of that has to do with that not having to find a parking place in front of the building. Because even when there's loading zones, a lot of times those are occupied, and trucks can't, they spend a good amount of time looking for a place to park to offload their parcels, and the bikes didn't have to do that. So huge benefits in potentially looking at smaller technologies to address some of these issues. They looked at tech and agriculture. This was so cool. So this also relates to the broadband issue that we talked about, because a lot of times when we talk about broadband, we think of the more urban environments and we think of our schools and hospitals and such, but there are increasing data needs in our rural areas as well. And that's what this was about. They were talking about, there's a study that they kind of class these use of robotics and the use of remote sensing as an enhanced practice, and the studies have found that farmers that adopt at least one of these enhanced practices substantially increases their yield, substantially decreases their operating costs, and in general makes a more profitable farming operation. And so some of those use cases, like this one here, this little solar panel, this is actually a weed killing robot. And so that you can see my cursor, right? Okay, good. This right here, this is a drone that's flying over the field. It's picking up all this remote imagery information and saying to this robot, hey, there's a weed or there's a critter. And this thing is equipped with both pesticide and herbicide, and it'll just drive itself over there and give a tiny little squirt of what it needs to take care of the situation. And so just getting a lot more high tech and efficient. That's easier on the environment because we're not just spreading herbicides, pesticides broadly over fields, we're targeting them. Brings down operation costs, increased safety for the workers, for the food product on the other end, huge benefits. Some of these other technologies are just harvesters and such that work completely on their own. And those are already in pretty wide operation throughout rural America. But these require huge amounts of data. And so broadband access is becoming an increasing issue for our farming community, because to take advantage of these technologies, they too need high speed, robust data access. That's something that hit me in a different way than it had before seeing this presentation. So that was really helpful. And I would be remiss if I did not talk about flying vehicles. And yes, we had flying vehicles as well. So what you're seeing here, this is just one slide. And I think to me, it's what kind of the most telling slide representatives from Hyundai Corporation were there, and they are working with our government and other governments on bringing flying vehicles to the masses. And one of the things that they talked about, they said that they and all the other major corporations, they are targeting the kind of mobility as a service that I talked about for flight for these flying vehicles. I don't know what else to call them, so I'm just going to call them flying vehicles. Because there's a lot to be worked out with the FAA, with local governments. This is going to be difficult. And so they are looking at the places where there's the highest impact. They're looking at how do we bring this to freight, and how do we bring this to moving large volumes of people. And so what their vision is, and I'm going to just take you through this slide, because if Hyundai was successful in doing everything that they intended to do, this is how transportation would look, which is you use your phone and an app to book a trip, regardless of how you're going to get there. The app looks for other passengers that might be on a similar trip to yours, and then starts matching you up with the transportation that you need to take the trip. And so it might send me a driverless shuttle to pick me up, and then I get on this driverless shuttle where they can they do things like verify my identification, any sort of health screening that needs to occur could occur on that. And then that driverless vehicle delivers me to this hub, this pad, where the flying vehicles depart and come to. And so you'd hop on this flying vehicle, it would take you to the next hub while you're playing on your phone or doing whatever. And then when you get delivered to the other end, you then get on another one of these driverless shuttles or some other method for getting to your final destination. And so they're seeing it much more like a service in between what we're used to for air travel and what we're used to for Uber, kind of an in between. But that is what they are currently working on, trying to bring to market. And so it's a taste of what we might see coming. Okay, lastly, then the Washington State Transportation Commission, the members voted unanimously, and this was significant because I've talked about the group that I'm on and the other subgroups, and we've been looking for recommendations to the legislature. And one that's been talked about a lot is the state doing a pilot to enhance that user understanding, that user acceptance, and help Washington be seen as a leader in adoption of autonomous technologies. And so the commission voted to have staff prepare a proposal to the legislature to direct the Washington State Transportation Commission and WashDOT to work together on a solicitation for a automated vehicle pilot for the 2023 legislature to put out. And they looked at a bunch of other states that have done pilots, and there's two that they really liked. Utah did a pilot where they had a very well-defined project. They wanted driverless shuttles, and the use cases they looked at were like for a hospital campus, for school campus, for other sort of campus type environments. And so they had a very specific solicitation for who can help us test these driverless shuttle type of a situation. So it's highly focused, highly defined, highly controlled by the state of Utah. State of Minnesota did a different type of pilot where they defined pilot objectives, and then they said, come all business, who's got something that's responsive to this? They then chose ones that they thought were most responsive and would best test and meet their objectives. And they chose a couple of those projects. And what our commission decided is they want something in between. They don't want something as open-ended as what Minnesota did because they think that there are areas, specific areas they might want to test, and they don't want something as defined as what Utah did because they want business to be able to tell the state, here's what's possible, rather than the other way around. So that is what I learned in 2 days of talk on logistics. And have I stopped sharing yet? Yes, I have. Okay. So I'll do my best with questions, but honestly, this was really just an update because there has been, things have slowed down. Things had slowed down in our state as some of those roadblocks, there were some of those pilots that had issues, including fatalities. Things had slowed down. There weren't really companies testing in our state, and so things are ramping up again. And it was really good to see how our state's engaging in that. So Cynthia and, oh, I'm sorry, JW, if I may, Cynthia, then Debbie Sullivan.
Okay, so I really like this presentation. I like the issues. I mean, certainly safety is a strong reason to look at this, and like the agriculture exposure to pesticides would be reduced, if not go away and stuff. So, it's a really interesting idea, but 3 things keep popping into my mind, and maybe it's being paranoid, but hacking can be hacked any place and every place. So I don't know if you ever discussed how to prevent that, if it even can be prevented. And then you talked about replacing workers and right now, obviously, there's a lack of some work, for instance, drivers, etc. But what that kind of does is do the same thing like the grocery store, where you get rid of the grocery clerks and you do your own thing, so you don't have jobs for non-tech people particularly. So that popped into my head, and I don't know if you discussed that. And then the very last thing is just simply because, and maybe this will over time change, but I know there's a lot of older people that refuse to use cell phones, of which, and even maybe my son, but he uses a flip phone, and so does my husband. So I'm wondering if what happens on those air things if you want to travel and you don't have a phone. Right now, I have to set up my husband's thing on my phone, kind of thing, when we travel. So those are the 3 questions, and maybe, as I said, the third one, maybe in 20 years. It may be irrelevant because everyone will have grown up with cell phones and not somebody that's 86 or something, or 83 or whatever age he is. Okay.
Yeah. So very quickly on those, because I can't speak intelligently on the subject matter, aside from to say on cybersecurity, that's a whole one of the subgroups that I talked about. So they've got a whole group working on cybersecurity. They didn't present at this, so I don't have any of the most recent information on what they are doing, but obviously data integrity, safety is a huge issue for this. So they are working on it. They've got a cybersecurity group full of those experts that are working on how can we safeguard on that end. Same thing with the workforce. They've got a subcommittee that's looking at workforce issues in relation to jobs are going to change as these technologies come into place. And so how do we predict that and account for it rather than react to it? That's what they're focusing on. And on the tech adoption, that did get talked about a lot. That's a big issue. And it's especially a big issue because we talk about safety. And one of the things that we've heard from the companies that are working on these technologies is they're safest when we've eliminated the most human thinking out of the equation. And that's going to take a while because we are going to have folks that do not want to adopt these technologies. And so that is a challenge, and one that that's, I think, one of the reasons we've seen a lot more of the focus to the more commercial applications of this, commercial in terms of these mobility companies working with business instead of targeting the end consumer, because that adoption isn't there. And then in terms of just accessibility, take that whole, you'll book it on your cell phone with a grain of salt. I mean, this is all just concept at this point. And so who knows how they'll actually have it work when and if something like what Hyundai is proposing comes to pass. But your point's well taken, that any of these things, they are technology based by definition. Therefore, are we leaving people behind?
Debbie?
Mayor-elect Sullivan.
Thank you. I have to get used to this, right? So I had watched a documentary on a study that they're doing in Texas regarding the trucks, the autonomous trucking that are also electric. So I'm very happy to see that we're also looking at this in Washington State. And hopefully that's really successful. The other thing that I was thinking of is with the thing that Hyundai is doing, is that's something that organizations like Intercity Transit is going to actually have to think about, because is that going to come to public transportation type of things? Is that something we might need to actually think about and, put in our, I'm assuming this will be really long range, but, just at least put a bullet point in it to pay attention.
Agreed. And that's why I wanted to bring this. There's not much answers here, but boy, does it spur a lot of questions. Councilmember Gilman.
They can do it in Olympia.
So, I just want to acknowledge my really mixed feelings that I hear JW's point about increased safety as you take the human element out of the equation. And then I also think across my life, I've had people say, you should buy a Volvo wagon. It's way safer than the Pinto you're driving, right? And then I think, well, half the people in town can only afford Pintos. And I just wonder if this sort of transportation would further stratify us into two groups: people who still drive clunkers and ride city buses, and people who have this new way of transportation. So I just, that's really on my mind. And I just have to say that Rochester, Minnesota is one of the Minnesota trials where they have a circulator around the Mayo Clinic. My daughter and her family live there, and they've been going out to ride the driverless bus around town and pretty excited. So it is amazing gee whiz stuff, but I just wonder how we make it sort of lift everybody in the community.
Yeah, and so on that is one of the reasons that was noted in terms of this industry shift to looking more at fleets and people moving applications, because if they do develop these technologies and market them to the end user, they will be expensive. And so therefore, by definition, we're kind of building inequities. And so the hope is that looking at more of these, that mobility of as a service sort of model, then will help with equity issues, because then you can talk about how much it really does cost for them to for anyone to access those services.
You actually drove a Pinto, Clark?
Many exploding and or explosive type cars. Yeah, air-cooled VWs.
Well, thank you all. I'll keep bringing these things as they come up, but hopefully you found that interesting. I did.
It was great, Mark. Thank you. And also, if you want more about flying vehicles, find an October issue of National Geographic magazine. They did a whole thing on the wave of air traffic. They start out talking about cars, but they go heavily into air traffic, electric planes that are already in they're using them already for trips less than 150 miles with up to 10 passengers in them. So it is coming faster than you think. It's pretty awesome. But that's a great article in October National Geographic. We're going to quickly shift over to Cynthia if she has a report from her outside committee.
I do. So the Growth Management Policy Board met Thursday, November 4th. And one of the three major things I wanted to mention is they discussed coordination with the tribes in comprehensive planning. They have 8 tribes in the 4 counties. And then they talked about adding the Nisqually tribe, a Nisqually tribe representative. And I know one of the Puyallup representatives said, well, I think the Nisqually tribe is part of the Thurston Regional Planning Council and stuff. But as we know, Nisqually goes into Pierce County as well. So that's one of the things they're going to ask if they would like to be a representative to the Puget Sound Regional Planning's Growth Management Policy Board. And then they also received an award for Vision 2050 from Jay Inns, from the governor, and for smart communities. And so did others in the other cities in the Puget Sound Regional Planning. They also talked about regional transit-oriented development committee updates and stuff, so which keeps getting brought back because transit's a really big deal. And then they mentioned the Puget Sound Action Agenda Development Workshops, and that's going to be, rather than in December, it was a little confusing whether or not they're having a December meeting or not, but it's at least going to be at their next meeting. And they mentioned that it's in January. So I'm not quite sure if there's a meeting in December, but that's my discussion or my presentation.
Thank you, Cynthia. Mark, if you've been able to catch your breath, it's time for your report.
Yeah, I've got a few things. So first, we're still looking to schedule the meeting of the subcommittee, the folks that agreed to work on equity, diversity, and inclusion with us. And so if you haven't had a chance to fill out that doodle poll and you volunteered to be on that, please do so, because we originally, I'm supposed to bring this issue back to council in December. Depending on our ability to schedule that, it may be January that I bring this back to council. So please, if you can, fill out that doodle poll. Wanted to let folks know, it looks like this is still in draft form, but it looks like we are going to get some redistributed funds this year from WashDOT. So to remind folks, near the end of a federal fiscal year, the Federal Highway Administration and Federal Transit Authority will look, or administration will look at out across and see, hey, is all the money that we programmed, is it going to get used? And if the answer to that is no, they start looking for states that can use more money. And in our state, we have a policy with WashDOT and the metropolitan planning organizations and regional transportation planning organizations about how WashDOT will distribute funds. And the main filter of whether you're eligible is, did you as an MPO or RTPO meet your obligation target for the funds that you already have by a certain date? And we've talked a lot about that here because we're really trying to make sure we always hit those dates of when we need to be obligated. We did hit those dates of when we need to be obligated, and it looks like that we could be getting about 134,000 in redistributed funds. So that's awesome. That's 134,000 that we didn't know we were going to have to put to good work in this region. So that's the importance of making sure we get, when we make these decisions on projects, that we get them under contract as in a timely fashion, and certainly by the deadlines, because Doing so could bring more money to our region. So thank you all to your staff for helping us hit that target for this last year, because it looks like it very well may be paying off with some extra funds coming our way. And lastly, we are the commute trip reduction hub, TRPC is, for the Thurston County. And so currently we've got the survey out to all of our 100+ major work sites in the area to get people's information on how they're commuting to work. And so any help you can provide in encouraging staff in your organizations to fill out the commute trip reduction survey, that's really important information for this program. So thanks for your help with that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So that takes us with, what a great meeting so far today with so much information. Time for you to do shameless plugs from your particular organization. Anybody have something to share? Or Debbie, did you have a question for Mark? There's people who can show you how to use that mute button. I'm not one of them. We'll go to Cynthia and come back to Debbie.
Just briefly, a lot has our executive director turned in his
on mute, so don't. Oh, sorry.
Okay, has turned in his retirement deadline, which is going to be November 30th, 2022. So the new board coming up in January will have to deal with appointing or coming up with a new executive director. That's all.
Thank you. Debbie?
There you go. It helps if the little drop down thing comes up when you push on your screen. So it's sorry about that. So one of the things that I wanted to share is that City of Tumwater has the 21-day racial equity and inclusion training that's on our website, and it's open to anyone who can go through the course, and you can do it personally or in groups. And so we're doing it in conjunction with the Tumwater School District. And so all of those videos, all of the things are available to anyone. And so I know a couple of other organizations have adopted that because they're going to be doing that kind of training with their groups. So I would say, feel free to use it and share it. And I think it's just really great resources. And it can be very in-depth. So it's 21 individual lessons, classes, videos, those kinds of things.
Great, thank you. Hillary, then Carolyn.
Yeah, thanks. I agree, Debbie. I think that's a great series. So I would encourage anyone who hasn't done it to check it out. Two things to share. We are super excited that we are having our ribbon cutting for our new solar array at Olympia High School on November 12th. So this is a partnership with Puget Sound Energy, and we are actively seeking other community solar projects. A lot of our new construction is prepped for solar, and so we're just looking for those opportunities. This has been a great chance for us to learn a lot about that, and I'll give kudos to Frank Wilson, who's our Executive Director of Operations and has done a lot of good work on this and is in our meeting today. And then the other thing I wanted to share is that we have, and Frank has just told me it stores up to 200 kilowatt hours. So it'll be a really cool teaching tool as well. Eventually, students from across the district will be able to see what that system is doing and use it as a learning opportunity. And then the other thing I wanted to share is that we did just, as a board, vote to approve a levy coming up in February. This is a technology and safety levy to replace our existing technology and safety levy. So you'll see that on your ballot. These are the kinds of levies that fund a lot of the communications access and computer software and technology that allowed many of us to sort of weather the pandemic in school systems. But we're also doing something a little bit new and different in the Olympia School District. We've added just shy of $2 million to this 4-year levy to maintain, enhance, and add safe walking and biking routes to school. So we're going to be looking forward. We've had some preliminary conversations with the city that we're really excited about, using a lot of their great resources and research into how to improve safe walking and biking routes. And we'll be reaching out to the rest of you partners to help collaborate on thinking how to do this very new thing. Schools don't usually put this in their safety levies, but we think it's really important. And we've heard from the community that this is really vital for more than just children. So we're excited to do this new, interesting thing. Stay tuned.
Great. Carolyn?
A couple of quick updates from Intercity Transit. You may remember that we implemented the Zero Fare pilot project in January of 2020, only to 2 months later have everything shut down with the lockdown on the COVID pandemic. So the Transit Authority has decided to extend this 5-year project for 3 years past the point where we're able to get service back up to pre-COVID levels, or 2028, whichever comes sooner. We're doing that to really get a fair picture of how well this is working for the community. So that's good news. And then another Zero development, we got a demonstration. Well, it's a roadmap to zero emissions fleet. And essentially the part I think you'll find the most interesting is staff is recommending that we move toward hydrogen cell fueled buses rather than electric for a number of reasons. Also, we are at about 79% now of back up to service, pre-COVID service levels. One of the things that's slowing that down is the availability of bus drivers who take a while to find, hire, train, and get on the road. And then lastly, Intercity Transit was one of the agencies that imposed the COVID vaccine mandate. And I'm happy to report that 96% of staff complied with that. And so we've only lost a few employees as a result of that policy, which felt risky at the time in terms of being able to maintain operations, but it's worked out. Back to you, Chair.
Should never be risky to do the right thing. Thank you, Carolyn.
Yep.
Chris?
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to say that we're finishing up our survey on broadband this month, should get some results back. I know we've gotten over 1,000 due to advertising on social media to catch some of the younger respondents out there who we were having difficulty reaching. So it is picking up. We're trying to get as many as we can, maybe up to 3,000. On the flood control issue that Gary mentioned within the Nisqually, or just in general statewide, with many of my meetings on water with former Senator Karen Frazier, who had a whole bunch of committee assignments to water when she was serving in the legislature as our state senator, she indicated that the state has no funding function for flooding, that it's totally dependent on counties. And I was surprised to hear that. I know that the Columbia River counties have some benefits from all the dams in that watershed since the last flood, which was in the 40s. But I don't think any of Western Washington's well protected, or, unless there's an emergency allocation even funded for flooding. So that is a problem that we face, and we need more coordination, as Gary pointed out, with some of the dam owners, et cetera. On the megawatt issue with the solar there, I want to congratulate folks for thinking ahead towards that. Just to give you an example, Skookumchuck Dam has a 1 megawatt capacity that PSE is recently connected to. Its main purpose is storing water for the coal plants, but I just wanted to point out that 200 kilowatts is about a fifth of a megawatt. So you get an idea that, you know, it's a significant amount of energy that they're talking about there. Thank you.
Thank you. David.
Hey, thanks, JW. Sorry, I know we're quick on time here. I'll just go fast. So we just broke ground on a new Nisqually Markets. Our store is going to be here at the edge of our reservation at the roundabout. It's going to offer gas, of course. It'll have a drive-through coffee shop and a drive-through car wash as well.
Oh.
This will be our first building with solar panels on it, and we'll also offer charging stations for electric vehicles.
Fantastic. Excellent. Thanks for bringing that to our community. I'm going to take the chair's privilege to share my screen. I hope I did this correctly, because this is what's going on in Yelm these days. We were able to restore our water tower. It was a community-driven event. Got repainted, got a lighting system put on it that we can program. This week it's in red and black to celebrate the Tornadoes' undefeated season and going on to the playoffs. And it's just a brilliant beacon of the spirit of Yelm. When you're driving through in the evenings, take a gander. And with that, thank you, Mark. And with that, I want to thank staff for the work that you do and the support that you give us to hold these meetings, and for everybody's participation. And we will see you in December. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.